I can't even sometimes put it into words now, because I've recently said to other people who have seen me kind of come out that other side, like, I don't even think I would recognize that person if I saw them looking back at me. And I remember thinking to myself that I didn't recognize the person looking back at me in the mirror on a daily basis. And I also want to share the fact that this was a really, really, really hard part of my fitness journey too, because I eventually, in describing some of that burnout that I had had with fitness, coupled with the fact that then gyms had started to close, I had no desire to work out. And I just didn't want to work out at home. I literally had the resources to do it. I had weights. I had all the things I could do. I had my brothers trying to motivate me to go outside with them, do body weight workouts, grab some dumbbells, whatever it was. I literally had every tool. And I felt like, now reflecting on it, I can laugh about it a little bit, but like, I would have just wanted to shake that person and been like, just work out, because you will feel better after this.
Let's link up with Krysta on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey there, FYX listeners. Welcome to our latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and it is just me, myself, and I for today's podcast episode. I am coming at you guys, still keeping with our Women's History Month theme. I will be back next week with another incredible guest who is a FYX female that I just absolutely love and admire, and I'm excited to give her the opportunity to share her story. But I didn't want this month to go by without diving a little bit deeper into Women's History Month in terms of this year's theme. So for those of you who don't know, because I didn't know this myself until one of my friends actually posted about it on Facebook on International Women's Day. But every year, Women's History Month has a theme that's tied to it. And the National Women's History Alliance is the group that designates that yearly theme. So I saw a friend post about it. I started to do a little bit more of my own research, and I just thought to myself, how can I provide some sort of context for this topic that hopefully will resonate with the FYX listeners? Because at the end of the day, whenever I jump on the microphone and whenever I get on here, sometimes I catch myself questioning, well, how can this be an actionable interview in terms of the takeaways for people? Like, how can somebody listen to this and think to themselves, oh, that was interesting. Here's how I'm going to go and then apply it to my life. So to back up a little bit, here's what the theme is. This is taken directly from history.com, and it says the 2022 theme is Women Providing Healing, Promoting Hope. This theme is both a tribute to the ceaseless work of caregivers and frontline workers during this ongoing pandemic, and also a recognition of the thousands of ways that women of all cultures have provided both healing and hope throughout history. And first of all, I just think this is amazing. I love it because I think it's a way to really kind of take some of the sadness that's going on in the world right now today and has been going on in the last 2 years, and being that like beacon of light for people. And there are so many women that I can think of who do exactly that, whether it's friends, coworkers, people on a more national scale, people who are international leaders, people who just touch your lives in ways that they might not even realize that they actually do. But the other part of it that I've really just been kind of sitting on since reading that about a week and a half ago was doing my own self-reflection, because when I hear the word healing, for me, I really think about the journey that I've been on that's led me to even be sitting in this chair and having hit record on this podcast. Now, in thinking about that and what that's looked like for me over the past several years, but really more so the last 2+, I have realized a couple of things. First and foremost, I've also thought about all of the women in my life that have provided healing to me, have promoted hope to me in a time when I really, really needed it more than any time ever. And so I want to shout them all out throughout this conversation, and also just talk about what healing can actually look like. Because at the end of the day, There's no exact roadmap to this, and you can listen to this podcast and take any of the advice that I have with a grain of salt, because what works for me might not work for you. But I also kind of realized that I spend so much time interviewing other people on the show or using my solo episodes to talk about nutrition advice. And that's all well and good. And I love creating the space for other people to have a platform to share their voice. But something that's also important to me with this is using my own experience to be able to give some sort of outlook or some kind of roadmap for anybody out there, even if it's just one person, even if it's somebody who only takes a little piece of what I'm sharing by listening to this episode. So I've noticed that I haven't actually really sat down, and I think I've said this in other podcasts, maybe more so with me being interviewed versus me being on this show in particular, but I've never really laid out all of the different things that happened that got me right here to this point today. And when I say the different things, I mean more of my personal journey. And my personal journey, it hasn't been about the decision to start a nutrition business or, the decision to leave certain jobs, take on new jobs, whatever it is. Yes, that is very much a part of it and will come up in this chat. But the other piece is the work that I did on myself, that personal growth and that self-development. And I think a lot of the reason why I haven't talked about it is because there was another person involved in the situation, and it's been an important point for me to be able to be sensitive to that fact and know that it is my own story to tell. And I've actually had conversations with them a while back, tell your story. This is a part of your story. It's part of my story. It's going to be a part of our stories and our futures in different ways. But I wanted to be sensitive to that first and foremost. And two, because healing is an ongoing thing. And in a lot of ways, I wasn't necessarily ready to talk about it, wasn't ready to talk about it with certain people. And now I've gotten to a place in my life where I feel like I really am. And more importantly, I hope that in sharing it, someone else can benefit from it in some way. So for those of you who maybe just found me through the podcast and haven't necessarily been a part of my social media journey for too long, almost exactly 2 years ago to the day, because it was easy to remember in terms of the calendar with the official, we'll call it, start of the pandemic when the world kind of shut down around March 13th or 14th of 2020. And we're now in 2022, but I'm recording this on March 16th. And if you're listening to it on the day it drops, it'll be the 17th. I had been going through several months, kind of the end of 2019 into the beginning of 2020, through what I would later figure out was honestly very much an identity crisis. I had quit a job that I really loved. And part of the reason why I quit the job is because I had gotten to a point where it wasn't serving me in the way that I wanted to, because everything I was preaching was not at all what I was practicing. And what I mean by that is I was working in the boutique fitness space, which I obviously still do now. And I was in a role that just, I felt, and a lot of this burden was placed on me, and I'm being careful with my words here because that is an important part of this. I felt that a lot of my kind of guidance and tips and tricks that I was sharing with clients to be able to help them get in their best shape of their lives, I was so invested in that process for them that I didn't have the capacity to focus on that for myself. That kind of compounded with the fact that we were having different personnel changes at this company. And I felt like I wasn't honestly being recognized for my hard work and the just blood, sweat, and tears I was putting into supporting this business. So I wound up making the decision to quit. And I usually was the type of person who always had another plan. But what I would come to realize in this time was that there were going to be a lot more things that were out of my control. But I was just so fed up with the situation that I was in. And I was honestly, again, didn't know this in the moment, so burnt out and so tired that I just had kind of gotten to a place where I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. And I, for me, lost a lot of the joy that fitness brought to me. And that was a very hard thing to grapple with because I think fitness is so much a part of my personal life too. I used it as a hobby and as an outlet. And then when it all of a sudden turned into my work, the relationship with it started to change. And that was challenging, but it wasn't something I ever really took enough time to sit and reflect on. So I didn't have the tools or even the words to be able to express it the same way that I am right now when I reflect and I look back on the situation. So just to kind of give the context of the timeline, this was around December of 2019. And I leave this job. And I really did not have another backup plan, despite the fact that I had been looking and looking and looking and looking for other jobs. And in doing that, I thought about going back to corporate America because for those of you who don't know this, but before I was in the world of fitness, I had a very brief stint in finance and had quickly realized that the desk life was not for me. But I was also struggling with the fact that I was seeing my friends have more flexibility with taking vacations and traveling, and I had to work a lot of weekends just by nature of being in the fitness industry and people working out on Saturdays. And I knew that was what I signed up for, but a part of me, frankly, just didn't really love it. And at the time, I was about to get married and I was trying to plan a wedding, a honeymoon, a bachelorette party, and I felt like I didn't have the flexibility to take time off without having to make up for it somewhere else. And that was a really hard thing to deal with. I just quite simply didn't have a lot of PTO. So I thought, okay, I gave this a shot. This is enough of a reason to not maybe want to stay in this business unless I can do it on my own terms in a different way. And at the time, online coaching wasn't really something that I had ever entertained. I don't know why, but I think that as we went on to see it well into March or so of 2020, it became really obvious that a lot of the things that I'm describing were reasons why people gravitated so much towards online coaching because all those factors were no longer a part of it. Now, thought about going back into a corporate job, and I'm now bumping up to the holidays and bumping into a time of year when a lot of people aren't hiring. And then you couple that with the fact that there's something going on and there's this virus and no one knows a whole lot about it other than that people are getting really sick and everyone's reacting to it differently. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because in a lot of ways, I want to be able to move on from this part of it. And I want to be sensitive to the fact that it's affected everyone in different ways, but it is what it is. And I was just met with, in that time, dealing with just the general uncertainty of the world, I was also met with personally a lot of rejection. And I was applying to all these different jobs and I frankly couldn't understand why I was constantly getting beat out. And I was putting in a lot of effort with interviewing and having to do projects and trying to network with people. And for anybody who's ever looked for a new job, we all know what that's like. And we all know that it's basically a full-time job in and of itself. So I didn't really know which way to turn. And in that process, I started to question a lot about where I was in my relationship with my partner at the time. And I think that this just general environment of uncertainty for me in my professional life made me start to feel like everything was unraveling because I put so much emphasis on who I was professionally that I wrapped up my whole identity in who I was professionally, that when I didn't have whatever that was supposed to look like, when I didn't have it quote unquote under control, or when I didn't have it just wrapped up in a nice tiny bow, as a therapist would say to me a few months from this point, I didn't know what to do. And I felt like I couldn't show up for my partner with the same expectations of what I envisioned for myself in my head or what I thought he needed. But a lot of that was me putting that pressure on myself. So again, couple months, probably wasn't even a couple months, but it felt like a couple months at the time. It was honestly probably a span of 4 to 6 weeks. I just got to a place where I literally felt like I couldn't function. And I woke up one day and I don't really know what it was about this day in particular because it wasn't any different than any other days that I had had. It was just I was feeling super low and I just felt like I didn't know what to do next. And thankfully at the time I was living with my younger brother and he wound up calling my mom and having her come down to North Carolina where I was living at the time. And she just tried to come and tried to help me with things that I usually had no problem with, very basic things, anything from preparing for a job interview to figuring out what I was going to eat. And I just started to notice that I couldn't make really basic decisions. And what was scary was that other people started noticing this before I started noticing it. What I now know is that those are all classic signs and symptoms of depression. I just didn't have a name for it at the time because I hadn't formally experienced that before in my life. So I wind up making the decision to go home because I just felt confused. Like I felt like I didn't know where my place was in North Carolina. And I felt like my partner and I weren't necessarily on the same page with how we wanted the other person to show up for us. And most of that was because we had never really been through anything super hard in our relationship. And while this wasn't necessarily the most catastrophic thing that could happen, it tested the way that we wanted to support one another. And it just made me reflect on the fact that we didn't have the same idea of how we wanted to give each other words of encouragement or anything like that. So I go back to New Jersey. It's like March 14th or 15th, now speeding up the timeline here. And I'm just like, I don't know when I'm going to come back to Charlotte, but I do know that I need a little time away. And what then ensued for me in the next like 4 to 5 weeks was just the lowest low feelings that I've ever really had. And I did not know what to do with them. And it was in that timeline of that month of March into April that I would then begin this journey of healing and trying to figure out like what that was actually going to look like for me. And I want to spend a little time on this part of it because it wasn't like this thing where I woke up and I was like, okay, I need to get better. I need to feel better. I need to do something to feel better. It was constant, daily self-doubt, struggle, not being able to sleep, feeling like I didn't know what to do with myself, going on a billion walks. I'm very fortunate for my parents to live only a few blocks away from the beach and using that as a place to kind of just like get that breath of fresh air and try to reflect, which I will attribute as one of the tools that's definitely been a part of my healing journey. But I felt like I didn't know what to do next. And I felt like I had all these great support systems with supportive family members, supportive friends, but I just knew that I wasn't sure if I wanted to get married. I didn't know for sure that I definitely didn't want to, but I just knew that I wasn't sure. And it was from this point on that all I could fixate on was the fact that I couldn't be upset and I wasn't allowed to be upset because it was my choice. So therefore, it was kind of like my fault. And how else did this manifest for me? This manifested in just feeling really unsure of what I wanted to do with my career, feeling really unsure of what I wanted to do with my professional life. That's when I started to realize everything I just said a few minutes ago of like the fact that I have so much of my identity wrapped up in my work and how that's not always a really healthy relationship to have. While it's important to figure out what your purpose is and all the power to you when you do, and it's a really cool feeling when you actually do, and I can say that from experience, but there's a fine line that you walk there. So again, it was a lot of, I can't even sometimes put it into words now because I've recently said to other people who have seen me kind of come out that other side, like I don't even think I would recognize that person if I saw them looking back at me. And I remember thinking to myself that I didn't recognize the person looking back at me in the mirror on a daily basis. And I also want to share the fact that this was a really, really, really hard part of my fitness journey too, because I eventually, in describing some of that burnout that I had had with fitness, coupled with the fact that then gyms had started to close, I had no desire to work out and I just didn't want to work out at home. I literally had the resources to do it. I had weights. I had all the things I could do. I had my brothers trying to motivate me to go outside with them, do body weight workouts, grab some dumbbells, whatever it was. I literally had every tool and I felt like now reflecting on it, I can laugh about it a little bit, but like I would have just wanted to shake that person and been like, just work out because you will feel better after this. But I let myself go to a point where everything became super hard and I didn't like that feeling anymore. Like fitness was always my thing that I really excelled at. And yeah, that's part of the reason why I liked it. Like if anybody's listening out there, there's plenty of things that we all like because we happen to be really good at it, right? Like that's just the honest truth. So when it wasn't something that came as easy to me anymore, I just didn't know how to reaccess it. I didn't like the fact that like doing a few push-ups on my toes all of a sudden felt super hard to me. And this is coming from the person who not too many months before would be standing on the other side, coaching clients, telling them, hey, it's not a big deal if you can't do push-ups on your toes. So I really don't know where some of those voices in my head were coming from that were saying like, oh, you shouldn't do this because it's too hard. But what I can say now today, and what I take as a sign of going through the healing journey and still being a part of it, because it's an ongoing thing and it's definitely not a chapter in my book that will ever close. But I can now say that like it's helped me in tremendous ways in understanding somebody who is just at the beginning and trying to figure out more of the psychology of how to coach those sorts of people. And I think that shows up a lot in the way that I coach now, because I take this position that's a lot more open-ended and just really trying to listen to you as a potential client or a current client of like what's actually blocking you and pushing you to dig a little bit deeper around like it's not the fitness, it's something else in your life that may potentially be getting in the way. It could be the way that you're looking at your calendar or managing your time or whatever it is. And the byproduct just happens to be the fact that you're struggling with the fitness piece because maybe it's just not a value of yours at the time. And I can definitely attest to being in a place in my life where I totally felt like that. I felt like I had all these plans for where my life was going to go in the next couple of years. And I was the one who decided to just light them up and be like, not doing that, not doing that. I don't know what I want to do here. And I just kept saying like a broken record, I don't know. So why would it really matter if I went outside and did a couple of squats or a bunch of push-ups or whatever it was? It just didn't seem that important. But it took a lot of repetition, and it took a lot of the same principles that I think are related to your fitness journey and to your nutrition journey to kind of get me out of this cycle. And some of those initial parts of my healing journey were, like I said, I felt like I was met with a lot of resistance because I did start going to therapy. I was doing it twice a week virtually, and I couldn't put myself in a spot where I was like really retaining some of the advice that I was getting, or not even the advice, but like the actionable steps that I needed to take on a daily basis to actually be able to help myself figure out what I really wanted. Because at the end of the day, it really came down to that. I just didn't know. And I kept looking to all these external factors to try to figure out what I wanted. But I think what I've been able to realize now is that like I already had all the answers. I had all the answers because I knew in my gut that something wasn't right. Like if I felt the way that I felt, there was something that was off in my environment that I needed to actually go and change. And what I didn't realize is that change was going to take time. And there's such a big part of me that being the type of person who wants to be able to find a solution and have a plan of attack, and that type A personality really showing, you can put yourself in a place where you feel like it's just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being stuck. And it's very uncomfortable when you have so many things that you can't control. I couldn't control the fact that, a lot of jobs were going through layoffs, and I'm out here trying to make a industry transition, which made it that much harder for me to try to make moves for jumps for different positions I was applying for. And I could not accept the fact that those facts when people told me them. Like I would have family members sit across from me and tell me that those things are out of your control. So why are you going to worry about them? And I would just shut them down. And it got to a point where I would be like, that is the worst advice ever. And they were so right. And it wasn't that it was the worst advice ever. It was that I personally was not in a place to be able to hear it because I couldn't hear what they were actually saying. I couldn't hear what was going to help me get to the other side. And they were just they just wanted to help. Like they wanted to help me get to the other side in any possible way that they knew how. So in kind of giving all of this color and sharing the feelings that I had and what I started experiencing, I mentioned that I had started going to therapy. I mentioned that I started taking walks and all these things. And it got to a point where I had to personally consider medication. And I wasn't sure that it was the path for me. And I think this is an episode probably for another day, because I think there's a lot that I've learned through the experience of being on an antidepressant and what that looked like for me, the potential cause and effect and side effects of how that might impact your fitness, your nutrition, whatever it is. But what I realized today is that it was one of those things where I needed that support to kind of kickstart the rest of my healing journey, because it wasn't until that became a factor for me that I was able to start hearing what people were saying and actually hearing what they were saying and being like, okay, I can wrap my head around this now. Or if someone was telling me like, hey, why don't you try to do some yoga? Like I could actually muster up what I needed to be able to go do that yoga and find that energy. And like even sharing this right now, and if you're listening to me and you have maybe known me years ago, or you know me now and you know the way I operate, it doesn't sound like I would have struggled with something like that. So I hope in being honest and sharing this, that you see like social media in and of itself is creating this reality that is so curated and doesn't actually represent a lot of people's truth. Because that was something else I did that I struggled with initially, but I realized was a part of the healing process for me, was reevaluate the relationship that I had with social media. I had to go through the painful experience of, deleting a lot of photos, deleting engagement photos, erasing things that were a part of my past, just because I wasn't ready to talk about what the decision I had made. And it also took me like 4 months, almost 3 or 4 months, to decide to officially call off my engagement. And I really sat with that honestly, like so close to the chest, because I only told my closest family, I only told my closest friends. And there are a lot of friends that I definitely pissed off during that time, because I kind of really went inside myself, and there were so many people that reached out to me that I just wasn't ready to talk to. And I wasn't ready to be able to kind of come around and be like, hey, thanks for reaching out to me. Like I didn't know how to have the conversation, and I didn't know why I felt like that, because at the end of the day, they weren't judging me for the decisions I was making. They were just reaching out. So something that I would say that is kind of like a takeaway through the healing process to kind of think about is like, be okay with just sitting in your feelings and trying not to project what you think people are thinking and let them in. Because I was so focused on this idea that like I was totally changing the perception that people had of me. So I couldn't let them in and let them talk about, or let them know, or let them hear from me about what was actually going on. And I really do think that a lot of that comes from social media, because like we're trying to fit all these really perfect pictures into these tiny little squares. And I'm not the first podcaster to make a comment like that, and I certainly won't be the last, but it's a hard relationship to then ultimately navigate when you have a business that is very much run by your social media. And that's something that I kind of examine on a regular basis, and will be the first to raise my hand and say that it can really go into one or two extremes. So something else I kind of did was like really take a social media cleanse. Like I stopped posting things. I needed to disengage. I left a lot of messages just unread. And for the people who continued to reach out to me when I was finally ready, I came back to them. And now in hindsight, it's so easy to talk about this and so easy to give the advice of like, don't worry, like the right people will be there for you on whatever timeline you need them to be, if they're meant to be a part of your life. But in the moment, again, I was so wrapped up in like what their perception was of me. And now I can say like, I don't know why I was like that, but I 100% do. Because again, I was just like so fixated on this idea that like, well, these are my decisions and I have to sit with them, and I'm not totally okay with them yet. So I really don't want to talk to other people about it. I couldn't separate the fact that they were just reaching out to me because they wanted me to know that they were there for me, and they wanted to support me in any way that they could. So this is also a thank you to those people, and they know who they are, who have continued to be a part of my life, even if I couldn't show up for them as the person that I now show up for them and want to continue to show up for them as. And now as somebody who has the tools to be able to communicate when, hey, I'm not really feeling that great. I literally just had a conversation with a friend like this the other day, and it's interesting. They're a friend that I only made very recently, like I would say in the last maybe 8-10 months or so. And I was supposed to go over to their house for their birthday, and I told them like, hey, I'm just like having a little off day, like I'm just like not feeling the right energy, and I don't want you to think that I don't want to be there for your birthday party. I'm just honestly not in the mood to go out, and I'm really sorry. And the response I got back in the text message was one that just really meant a lot to me, because it showed me my own growth. And he had said back to me, you never need to apologize to me. Like that's not the type of relationship that we have. And for me, that's a sign of actual healing, because I'm letting in the right people who can reinforce that for me. Because I had that moment where I was sorry and felt like I wasn't showing up for that person, but then he reinforced to me that message that I needed to hear again. And that was super cool. So in just kind of bringing it more into the now and bringing it more into, well, what am I continuing to do today? What I wanted to share as a part of this episode in terms of those action steps is some of the other things that I did do to be able to try to figure out what the heck I should do next. So we're now into like May of 2020, and I finally did make the decision, like this is not the person I'm meant to be with. I wound up going back to Charlotte again, officially packing my stuff, because I really initially had only brought home a suitcase and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next year. And with the help of my mom and my brother, moved everything back. And then I was like, okay, this is really it. This is now really time for me to have a fresh start. But I would be totally lying if I didn't say that a lot of the Krysta that was showing up in March with so much self-doubt and so much struggle and so much uncertainty and not being prepared of dealing with the things that I couldn't control, she was still very much there. And she was still very much at the forefront of my actions, feeling like I didn't know what I should be doing with myself on a day-to-day basis, not having that motivation or discipline or desire to work out. And it took several more weeks of me just trying to navigate like what my new normal was going to be before I really started to even feel like an inch of myself again. And some of the things that I did was, one, I had mentioned going on walks to the beach. That was super helpful. Two, after a lot of resistance, and I mean a lot, like multiple people tried to put a journal in my hand multiple times, and I could never keep it up for more than a day or two, I finally jumped into the 5-minute journal. I may have mentioned it on this podcast before. I definitely mentioned it on my Instagram. But I think it's really great. And one of the reasons why I think it's really awesome is because it is a journal that has a lot of prompts in it for you. You can get it on Amazon. And the reason why I like it is because for me, even though I really enjoy writing and I really enjoy these platforms and being able to speak and whatever, sometimes I'm like, oh, it's a blank page. That can be very intimidating. I don't know what I want to write about. And I was so not in tune with my feelings at the time. And I was so not in tune with the person that I thought was a really good communicator before. I couldn't find that person inside of me at the time, that I felt like I needed a little more structure. And that really provided it for me by just a couple different prompts. Things like, name a couple things that you're grateful for today. I think it's 3. If you can tell, I haven't actually done the journal in a little bit, admittedly. And then talking about plans that you had for the day. So setting different mini goals. And it could be something as simple as, and again, this was guidance I had gotten at the time, like something as simple as going for a walk, trying to make your bed, or just like doing things that picking things that you were guaranteed to do. And what's really awesome about that is now that's something that's become such a principle of the way I coach. Because when I have a client who's telling me that they want to get back into working out again when they've taken a little hiatus, I always tell them, let's set this up in a way that's like dummy proof or failure proof. Like it's going to guarantee your success. So don't tell me that you're going to go to the gym 3 times this week if that's not something that's honestly, truly realistic. If you open up your phone and you look at your calendar and you tell me that like, it doesn't really seem like you have the time for that. If you already have that feeling, well, then it's not going to happen. So I started to take those same kind of making those like mini goals and take these like micro decisions on a regular basis and start to slowly stack them so that I could start to have that feeling of success. And from there, it turned into, okay, I'm going to do this a couple days a week. It still isn't every day. It wasn't every day. But I got back into my fitness routine and I learned again what it was like to be at the beginning and set new goals for myself that at the time, or 2 years prior, or even a year prior, I would have been like, oh, well, I can totally do that. And it took me having to like shed this person that I thought I was and just grow into the person that I'm meant to be and the person that I want to be. And recognizing that that was something I did have control over, because my response to the situation that I was going through, it didn't matter that it was my choice. It didn't matter that it was my choice, or it didn't matter that maybe I could have said it, quote unquote, happened to me, in the sense that someone else made the decision to walk away from the relationship or whatever it was. That's just my example, whatever it is for you. So what I started doing was really focusing on like little teeny tiny things that I could do. And it then just kind of like got me back into this groove of being like, okay, well, like somebody had suggested that I do yoga. Like maybe I just pick a 10-minute yoga video on YouTube. It doesn't need to be this formal thing where I'm, the room doesn't have to be set up perfectly. I just went outside and jumped on a yoga mat, 10 minutes, did whatever I needed to do. And what's interesting now is like, if you guys listened to a few episodes ago, I have people in my life who'd be like, hell yeah, that's what your yoga practice is supposed to be. It's whatever you need. It's going to look different all the time. Shout out to Bridget, who was on one of our most recent episodes for the month of March, actually. So what else? So kind of feeling like I'm getting to a point here where I'm starting to ramble a little bit. And honestly, I just want to pause and say that this is a vulnerable conversation for me to have as I'm sitting here recording it. And that's part of the reason why I've never sat down and gone into a lot of detail too, is just because it was an uncomfortable part of my life that sometimes I don't necessarily want to bring back up, but I know I need to, because I know that there was a lot to be learned from that. And there was a lot that will help me through any future situation that I need to navigate. And the other big thing that I really started to do was read a ton of books, and people kept throwing books at me. And I want to highlight the fact that, like, again, there were a lot of things I kept getting told to do months prior, but I didn't do them. And I always like kind of racked my brain and asked myself, like, well, what was the day when something was different? And honestly, I don't know. Like I don't remember there being a day where I woke up and I was like, okay, today's the day that I'm just going to stop feeling the way that I do. It didn't happen like that. And for me, there were a couple books that I want to share because I think all of them are really important. But one of the ones that was really helpful was a very short read that is like literally a $5 book on Amazon. And it is How to Survive the Loss of Love. And at first I was like, I didn't think a book like that would apply to me, because when I heard the title, I thought it was more about like grieving when there's a death in your family or something like that. But I did lose that in multiple ways. My love for my career, my love for the person that I thought I was going to marry, because I did have and still do have so much love for that person, because they're a very important part of my story. And I had to address like how I was going to leave that, and like departing from that was not as simple as being like, okay, well, like we didn't have the same vision for our future. So it was like, I'm just going to move on and wash my hands from this. Obviously, I think that's pretty apparent for me even sharing the story, that it wasn't something where I could just rip off the Band-Aid. And that was a part of the reason why it took me a few months to like really, really examine the decision. Also because I felt like I wasn't in a headspace to make a decision very clearly, because there were a bunch of different variables in my life and different components of my life that had all these question marks tied to them, that I didn't want to jump and make an irrational decision. I wanted it to be as logical as it possibly could be. And there were just a lot of elements that it wasn't going to happen that way. And it didn't, but it worked out. Even though like there was so much uncertainty, it totally worked out. And even though there's still a lot of things that I find that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis that are super challenging. And there's some moments where I wonder like, well, what if this had happened this way? I wouldn't change any of it. And this is something that has come up a lot in conversation for me recently, which I'm going to get to next. But there's one other book I want to mention before I move around and come off this tangent, is a book that I recommend to clients often because there were so many lessons in it that had nothing to do with nutrition, but I find that you can totally tie them to nutrition. And that is a book called Clarity and Connection, which I will also link down in the show notes. It's by Young Pueblo, and it's awesome. It's a really fast read. It's basically like short prose, like almost like poems. And it's just really beautifully written. I recommend it to friends a lot too. And in reading that, it just kind of, I read it at the right time because at this point, like I had made the decision to move on from the relationship, and I had made the decision that I was going to call New Jersey home again. And like I was slowly starting to feel cemented in that fact, but I still missed friends I had in Charlotte. And like I was still struggling with reaching back out to people and figuring out like what kind of timeline I had in terms of when I was ready to talk. And it kind of like, not that I needed to explain myself, but felt like I needed to. And in reading this book, a lot of what is often referred to in the book as like turbulence, a lot of those feelings were just explained to me in a way that was communicated better than I could possibly communicate them myself. So it just reaffirmed that, hey, like you are making the right decision, and ultimately helped me. I think where I feel like I'm moving well through the healing process is getting better at actually listening to my gut and getting better at listening to what I want versus trying to make decisions based on this like ideal that it wasn't explicitly set by somebody else, but I think that I set for myself a little bit based on who I was when I was like 17 years old. And not for nothing, but none of us are the same as the people that we were when we were 17 years old. And we shouldn't be. That's a good thing. But sometimes we get really stuck in these narratives that we have, and that we think that, well, every decision should kind of just like layer on to what the next thing, to that next thing. And if the decision deviates from that in any way, then, oh, like you've made a mistake. So that book was another really big one for me. Other than that, though, the point that I was kind of jumping around there for the last couple of minutes was the fact that learning how to listen to my gut was something that I thought I knew how to do, but it took this really difficult experience to be able to like actually understand that I can do it. And the reason why I say I thought I knew how to do it was because it actually relates to my professional career, and it relates to the fact that I only had a traditional office job in finance for like maybe 2 years. And at the time, I was 23 when I made this decision. I felt this pull to jump into the fitness industry full time. I had been teaching part-time and had been doing that for years, like even since I was in college. And I thought that that was me trusting my gut and saying like, you know what, take this risk. You should do it now, because if you don't do it, like you're always going to wonder what if. But that choice was only like 50% of what I would then face later, while I developed that confidence in my professional career to be able to walk away from that same job and be able to recognize like, hey, this isn't serving me anymore. I don't think that what I spent enough time doing was really figuring out who I was on my own as just Krysta, because I had had a series of relationships that were pretty much back to back, few months in between where I didn't have a significant other. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like there's plenty of people who meet their person in that kind of process. But I think it took me needing to realize like I had to do a little bit of my own thing, and also recognizing that I am a very independent person and I have trouble even asking for help, which is probably why I went for a few months before even allowing anybody to kind of see the hurt and the pain that I was experiencing when I first had quit that job and started to spiral into what became a pretty serious depression, was because like I just wanted to do everything on my own. And I didn't even know how to really navigate that in my own relationship. And it would take me having to be by myself for an extended period of time to kind of figure that out, so that I can then now show up in a new relationship, not just romantic, but also personal with family members, even in professional ways, to try to be able to better express when I needed help, when there was too much on my plate, when I felt like I wanted to communicate with somebody about something like right then at that moment, or needed a few minutes to be able to just kind of digest that information. I never thought about any of that stuff. And I think there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily think about it because they think that they don't have to. But I can honestly say that that was kind of one of the best things for me that came out of all of this, because it made me really reconsider the way that I use certain words, or the way I try to express and communicate some of my needs and how other people react to them, and how I can be better about doing all of those things too. And that all of that is a work in progress. And again, that's why healing is so much a journey. And the other piece that has really gotten me through so much of this, and the big reason why I even have my headphones plugged into this microphone right now, is because podcasting and listening to podcasts first and foremost was such a big part of the healing journey for me. And I said at the very beginning of turning the microphone on for this episode that in being vulnerable right now and talking through this and having kind of taken some time to think about when I wanted to talk through it, there's a therapy in doing this too, but there were just so many different outside perspectives that I started to collect and get and gather, that I was then able to kind of take these people who I didn't even necessarily know. Some of them have gone on to be close friends now and mentors and coaches in my life, and just kind of think okay, well, who are these people that they're bringing onto their shows, the experiences that those people are having, and how does this apply to my life? Well, books can certainly do that for you too. And I definitely went through a period where I read a bunch more books than the other ones that I just mentioned, but podcasting was a way to kind of do that faster. And I would also multitask with getting outside, going for a walk, and also listening to something and getting wrapped up in some of these other people's stories and their experiences and the lessons that they could take away from them. But that also kind of leads me into the last point that I want to share with this. And that's the fact that the next steps that I made once I started to, again, little micro moments of feeling a little bit more like myself, is then in trying to navigate what the heck the FYX podcast was going to look like, what the Fitness Fix business was going to look like. A lot of it was just jumping right in and taking on clients, and feeling fortunate that I did maintain some of the relationships that I had in Charlotte with people I formerly coached, and they still wanted to work together. But then also hiring multiple coaches myself to help me get these things off the ground, but also connect with like-minded people who are going through the same thing. Because if there's one big lesson that I could take away from the experience of what I went through, that putting myself in that very isolating space when people were reaching out to me and trying to support me, if there was one thing I could go back and do a little bit differently, I would certainly say it would be that. And I would certainly say that it would be trying to remember again, that somebody isn't judging, that they do have genuine care and concern for you, and they want to support you in any way that they can. And now my goal in taking that information with me and carrying it forward is that I hope that I could do that for someone else too. And I hope that even this comment can be a reminder to you that if there's anything that you're going through and you feel really alone with it, don't just sit with that. Talk to somebody about it, even if it's even if you don't want to go into a ton of detail, even if it's just to describe your feelings, even if you're not actually sharing the situation or what's happened to you. And I'd love to be that outlet for anybody that tunes into the show at any time. And when I turned the mic on today, I had no plan really for all the different things I wanted to hit in this chat and this conversation. And I didn't anticipate talking for this long. So if you have stayed with me through this far, I just kind of want to sum it all up and to recap everything, to again give you what steps you could possibly take or where you should start if you're feeling any of these things. But journaling, can't recommend the 5-minute journal enough. If you need to just kind of dip your toe in the water and see what that's like for you, I will link that down in the show notes. Reading, podcasts, I will link all the titles that I mentioned. I will link some of the different podcasts that I've really enjoyed and continue to listen to. Getting outside, going for a walk, being in nature. And the other thing I will say too that I didn't even mention here, but having a pet. having and getting a dog in this time has been a lot of work. And if you follow me on my Instagram, love my dog. She's super cute, but she is also quite a handful. But having like something that just gives you so much unconditional love and support is extremely therapeutic. So that's also been something that's been very, very helpful through the healing journey. So if you do have a pet, just give them a hug, spend a little more time with them. It even will help you get outside and going for a walk. And that for me, like really encouraged me to have structure and more of a routine as I navigated building my podcast and navigated online coaching, where I was just now like cemented in a chair all day long after having been this person who for several years would mostly spend her time like running around gyms and teaching classes all day long and being really extroverted. Now doing everything behind the computer was a little bit of a switch for me too. And then just finding your people and finding your circle in the form of friends, colleagues, coaches, mentors, family members, whatever, any of those people, any combination of those people, and just really like remembering that who you choose to surround yourself with is going to influence your path. And I think that's also something that I really knew all along and I felt deeply in my gut, which was why I recognized that I wasn't on the path that I wanted to be on, because me and my partner didn't have the same vision. We didn't want the same things for our future. And we also didn't support each other necessarily in the same ways when we were going through hard things. And for as much as that like really sucks, because there were so many other amazing things about our relationship and so many other amazing things that I loved and will always love and like will take into future relationships too. It was important enough to understand that like my life would look totally different because now we were trying to become a team and I needed to have a better understanding of what I wanted out of my life. And when I saw other people doing the things that I wanted to be doing, I was like, I got to get closer to those people. And that's who I needed to be around. And that's the kind of energy that I needed to be a part of. And it's on you to put yourself in those situations. Like no one's going to do it for you. Yes, again, having that great support system can help you make it happen, but you've got to be able to take ownership of that and really be the leader in that kind of process for yourself. If there's something that really speaks to you and is something that you want that is going to help you to ultimately get to wherever it is that you're supposed to go. And whatever places you're supposed to be. So before I just keep going on and on, I'm going to wrap up the show. And I just want to shout out again, every single person that has been a part of my journey in the last 2 years in particular and have seen me become a really different version of myself. Some days a version that I absolutely love and some days a version that there's things I recognize that I need to work on or things that I'm not super proud of, because that's what ultimately makes all of us human. And I want to shout out any woman out there who is facing the same thing. And if you are, or if you don't know how to start, if you don't have any of the people that I mentioned, know that I'm always a resource and somebody that is always in your corner. This has been another episode of the FYX podcast. And from wherever you're listening from, I hope you have an amazing day.